Welcome to your Friday Daily Delivery. I'm your host, Michael Rand. I know I say this almost every day, but we really have a lot to talk about today. I'll be joined in a little while by Star Tribune Timberwolves beat writer Chris Hine, talking Timberwolves, talking Malik Beasley's 12-game suspension, and breaking down the first two games of the Chris Finch coaching era. But first, what did I miss? Oh my goodness. You missed an unfathomable Gophers loss to Northwestern in men's basketball on Thursday night. Gophers playing in a game they absolutely have to have, right? Chip Scoggins was on the show a couple days ago talking about what they need to do to get in the tournament. Basically, it comes down to avoid bad losses, right? Even with everything that's gone wrong in the last month and a half to kind of derail this promising start, if you can avoid the bad losses, bank a few wins in these last four games, you've still got a pretty good chance to make the tournament, and if you make the tournament, you've got a chance to win a game or two, and then everybody feels better about where the season is. But facing a team at Williams Arena that is on a 13-game losing streak, Northwestern, Gophers jump out to a 17-3 lead, but they end up losing 67-59. Did injuries to Liam Robbins and Gabe Kalsher play a role? Absolutely, right? We need to say that right off the bat, but that's not an excuse, right? This is a bad Northwestern team, a really bad Northwestern team, one that had lost 13 consecutive games. You jump on them 17-3. The big problem is you keep settling for three-pointers. This is not a good three-point shooting team. In fact, it is one of the very worst in college basketball. The Gophers take more three-pointers than almost any other team in major college basketball. How do they do when it comes to making threes? Well, I'm looking at Sport Reference right now, which has the up-to-date numbers. 3-point percentage. Gophers making just 29% on the season. I'm scrolling. 333rd in college basketball out of 347 teams that are playing this season. In the game that might define their season, Thursday night against Northwestern, they go 4 for 27. Here's Richard Pitino, head coach, talking about not driving the basketball more.
Yeah, we still are getting three-point happy too much. We got to have guys drive the ball versus shoot so many threes. We keep talking about it, get to the rim. So they probably shot about 7 too many, 8 too many.
So what does this loss all mean? Well, Jeff Goodman, Stadium Sports, tweets last night, you can probably stick a fork in Minnesota now. Just lost to Northwestern at home after a terrific start to the season. They're 4-10 since December 31st, 6-11 now in the Big Ten. Yeah, Marcus Fuller noted this in his game story in Star Tribune, StarTribune.com. They were already starting to be on the wrong end of some of the bracketology. Some of them, looking at last four in, but, more realistically on the wrong side of that bubble. Well, if you lose to Northwestern, a team with a 13-game losing streak at home, yeah, that's gonna do some damage to your tournament hopes. Still 3 more games left in this regular season, none of them against great opponents. No chance to really prove yourself, so all you can do now is avoid another bad loss. Even if they do that, it's going to be hard to see how they get in at this point. If they don't make the tournament, what does that mean, big picture? Well, hard to say, but I can tell you what Matt Norlander from CBS Sports wrote. Overall record, 140 and 118 for Richard Pitino. It comes down to this, he says. If Minnesota makes the NCAAs, Pitino stays. If it doesn't, he doesn't. And that was in a piece earlier this week on, hot seats for coaches, and they label Richard Pitino as having one of the hottest seats in coaching. Now, I don't take this lightly. I don't take talk of someone's job status lightly. I like Richard Pitino. I think he's done a decent job here at least, but we'll get into a little bit more of that job status here in a minute with some of your questions that I asked for last night after this loss. Okay, let's run through some of those questions right now. SSDIY says, I sat on the couch watching, and I think I got more steps in than the Gophers on offense who weren't touching the ball. Yeah, ball movement. You got a way to beat a good defense or a zone defense. You got to move, right? You got to move, you got to cut. You can't settle for those jump shots like Pitino is talking about. Nathaniel says, we need to talk about Gopher player body language. It didn't seem to have fight at the end. Carr playing hero ball as if no confidence in other teammates. Has Pitino lost the team? Hard to say. End-of-game situations, that's kind of how they've played. I'm more disappointed in the inability to just kind of put Northwestern away early. You've got a team that's lost 13 in a row. You get up 17-3. Next thing you know, it's 19-19. You got a ball game the rest of the way. Don't let them get into that game at the beginning, and we don't worry about body language at the end. Danker says, my hot take, Mashburn needs to be running the point. Carr isn't a great facilitator anyways. Maybe that way we can run some sets to get him better shots off the ball. He's literally the only person who can shoot, so let's get him some easy looks from 3. Now, I think having Carr and Mashburn on the floor at the same time, which has happened more frequently as Mashburn has entered the lineup, and now with Kalsher out, is certainly a net positive when you get 2 ball handlers out there. You know, you're still a good team when Marcus Carr touches the ball as much as possible. But yeah, some more sets like that I think could benefit them. I just wonder if it's too late at this point. Almost everything else you guys sent me had to do with Richard Pitino, 7 or 8, having to do with Richard Pitino and his job status. Lauren, I like this one. This ends the last legacy of Norwood Teague and the mirage of Villa 7. He pretended to create. Villa 7, Via 7, I can't remember how we pronounced that back then. But yeah, this was a Norwood Teague hire, and if this does end up being the end for Richard Pitino, that would close the book on a lot of the hires that Norwood Teague made. Kayla wants to know, what has Pitino done to move the program forward in his 8 years? Tell me. Matthew says, I mean, this has to close the book on the Pitino era at Minnesota, right? Again, hard to speculate about somebody's job status. We don't know how the rest of the season plays out. You never know if they win their last 3 games, sneak into the tournament. And we don't even know what Mark Coyle is thinking right now, the athletic director. We don't know what the appetite is to pay a buyout right now, like me and Chip talked about a couple days ago. I will say this. When I talked to Mark Coyle for a story a few years ago after they hired Lindsey Whalen, here was a quote he had about the process of hiring coaches. Quote, I like to be very prepared. I have a short list of coaches. If you come to my house in St. Paul, I can open up a desk drawer and I've got green files of every sport, coaches we want to go after. We constantly update that list because you never know when something is going to happen. When something happens, I believe you have to go quickly. Now, whether that means something's afoot with the Gophers basketball program, I don't know yet, and I'm not gonna speculate on that. I'm not even gonna say Richard Pitino should be fired. I think there's some things he's done well. I think there's some definite deficiencies, and the thing that bothers me is how they slide at the end of seasons. But this much I do know: if they do decide to go in a different direction, it will not be a haphazard search. Mark Coyle will have a target in mind, and that person will be hired quickly and quietly.
I'm Nyla Jean Myers, Senior Assistant Sports Editor at the Star Tribune. Thank you for listening to Strip Sports Daily Delivery. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast and our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
Happy to be joined right now by Chris Hine, our first 3-time Daily Delivery guest. Chris is tallying all of those up in his head and on an official scoreboard. Chris covers the Timberwolves for the Star Tribune and has had a very, very busy week. Not only the hiring of Chris Finch, the firing of Ryan Saunders, but news Thursday late afternoon that Malik Beasley has been suspended for 12 games, stemming from his role in the events of this fall. Chris, let's tie a bow on the Beasley stuff before we get into the Finch hiring and the kind of the on-court stuff. Does the 12 games, is that square with what we might have thought, or how do you where does that land in terms of suspensions and what we thought might happen?
Yeah, I think it was always hard to pin down just exactly how long it was going to be. But 12 games is a significant suspension for this. And it's hard to dispute anything. The Wolves have accepted it. There's going to be no appeal or anything like that. But I think when you read the details of what happened and the aftermath of what happened, if you go back to earlier this month, our Paul Walsh covered all the details of the sentencing hearing, and the family that he threatened with the rifle is still suffering traumatic consequences from the incident. And so the NBA took its time with this decision. They wanted to review the sentencing documents, get all the information they can. And it's taken about, 2+ weeks for them to get all that in order. And they levied a fairly significant decision here. And Beasley will be out about a month. I did the math, and I think the first game he'd be eligible to return, barring any COVID related postponements, is March 27th. So he and D'Angelo Russell might return to the lineup again around the same time. But needless to say, a significant absence here as the Chris Finch era gets underway.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes his job a little bit more difficult as he's trying to get to know these players. I mean, Malik Beasley has been on the court one of the most consistent players on this team and one of the most durable players on this team this season, and one of their, best 3-point threats. What do you, as we think about this in an on the court context, how do you think, in the short term, Chris Finch reallocates those minutes and starts to think about this roster, in a way that, at least in the short term, will not include Malik Beasley?
Yeah, interesting to think about that. I think one guy you might think could see an increased chance is Jalen Noel, because they're going to need somebody to, I think, play that role of shooter scorer. And of all the guys on the bench, I think he's best equipped to try and at least get a chance initially to compensate for that. Maybe we see Jarrett Culver slide into this role as well. Josh Okogie, those kind of guys, I think, will be jockeying for the extra minutes here. Noel will provide most of the offensive punch. That would be my initial first blush guess. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, Noel makes sense to me. I mean, if we'll talk about this a little bit later on in the segment, but if they want to play, this style that includes, a lot of volume of 3-pointers, in the first game of the Chris Finch coaching era, they shot 54 3-pointers. If they want to be able to shoot and shoot with accuracy, Noel gives you a good chance. I would think you're right that this certainly increases the chances that Jarrett Culver gets himself back into the rotation. Probably includes a little bit of a chance for Josh Okogie to show the new coach what he can do, because they were already going to try to figure out how to get Culver back into this mix, and now there's 30 plus minutes a night that have been accounted for with Beasley that are now suddenly available, and Noel was already playing some of those minutes. Okogie was already playing some of those minutes. Maybe Jaden McDaniels gets a little bit more time, but as a pure shooting guard, the best probably comparable is maybe Jalen Noel, and somebody who could get hot. Maybe not Beasley hot in fourth quarter time, but someone who can shoot that way.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it does represent an increased opportunity for some of those guys, and I think the suspension just I think it serves as a reminder of the seriousness of the incident overall, and it's easy to lose sight of that as you track on court performance. But I think today was a reminder of a significant event that happened. The Timberwolves throughout this process have stood by Beasley. They signed him to the new deal after the incident happened, knowing full well that there were going to be legal and league consequences from the signing. He's on 3 years probation, and one thing about that probation is there's no alcohol use or illicit drug use as part of the terms of the probation. So he has to kind of mind his P's and Q's while serving the duration of this contract. It is a risky thing. He says he's determined to do so. But the only thing that will stand is his actions over the next 3 years.
Good stuff on that. You've covered that kind of from start to finish, with help from Paul Walsh, obviously. And look for more coverage from Chris on the Malik Beasley situation in Friday's paper and on StarTribune.com. I haven't had a chance to talk to you, at least for the podcast, since the Saunders firing, the Finch hiring. Just your perspective on how it went down, when it happened, and Chris Finch is a name that you had been mentioning to me for a while now. So what, your level of surprise or unsurprise?
I think, like a lot of people, I'm surprised at just how quickly things happened and transitioned from Ryan Saunders being fired at around 10 o'clock Central Time on Sunday night to reports leaking out about 10:05 Central Time that Chris Finch was now going to be the next head coach. I think that the whole process and how quickly it played out was surprising, and as we've seen over the last few days, has come under some criticism from various NBA circles for the lack of a diverse search and process along those lines. As it pertains to Chris Finch, yes, we had conversations about it because at the time, just people that you talk to around the league, the gist that I got was that Chris Finch and Rosas are very close, dating back to their time in Houston together. And some people thought at the time that Finch actually had a shot of getting the job before it went to Saunders. So you're always kind of keep an eye on that, where it's like, okay, this guy didn't get the job this time, but if it comes open again down the road, will he be available? And he wasn't a head coach yet in the league. He was an associate head coach for the Raptors. So he was out there, and Gerson Rosas made the move to go and get him. As we said, it drew a lot of criticism, but again, based on kind of what you had heard at the time, it really didn't come as a huge shock to me, at least, that Chris Finch is the head coach of the Timberwolves now.
You've been in all of the news conferences, the Zoom news conferences, since Monday, I believe, when Finch was announced, and, having gone through some games now, some post games, getting a chance to talk to some players before and after games. How do we get a sense yet of how this is playing out in the locker room? I know we can't get in the locker room right now, but just even the body language of players or what they're saying, how do you think this is being received among Timberwolves players?
Yeah, it's really tough to tell. I think just in some of the interviews, I think there's a couple different tones being struck here. I think there's some disappointment over Saunders being let go, because Saunders had good relationships with a lot of the players. I think there probably was a little bit of frustration, at least that's not, that hasn't really bubbled to the surface. But Karl Towns, the other day, I thought did a commendable job of kind of walking the line of supporting Chris Finch and saying he was happy and excited to play, for a new coach, and was, looking forward to kind of the change. Thanking Ryan Saunders for all that he did for him, and saying that they're still, that they're good friends, and all that he did in his life. And at the same time, acknowledging David Vanterpool and hoping that Vanterpool gets a head coaching job. I thought Karl did a good job of kind of representing the franchise and being like the voice of the team in that moment on a Tuesday morning when he addressed it for the first time. Because I think that kind of sums it up. I think you could have those kind of thoughts where you're a player. Maybe you wanted to see David Vanterpool get a shot. It's not his time, but at the same time, you have a new coach and he's trying to get to know you, and you're trying to get to know him. And for better or worse, this is your coach, and he's the one that's going to be making the decisions. And you give him a chance to prove himself. And I think that you could have those kind of two trains of thought in the immediate aftermath of this. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing playing out.
I want to get to how Chris Finch wants to play, which is definitely tied to how Gerson Rosas wants to play. But first, let's talk a little bit about, the first two games we've seen, and, we're not going to assess Chris Finch as a coach on two games. He's, just getting to know these players. He's not going to be able to install much of anything till they get a practice, let alone maybe this little mini break between the first and second half of the season. But what do you think he has learned about the players he inherited off the bat? What do you glean from what he's seen, what he feels like he needs to fix versus just what his overall philosophy is right now?
Yeah, I think defensively it's going to be a big work in progress here, especially as it relates to how fast they want to play. And I wrote about this for Friday's paper. He wants to increase the tempo, and tempo just doesn't mean, playing fast and shooting early in the shot clock. Tempo is ball movement when you get the ball in the half court. And even if the shot comes late in the shot clock, was the action that led to the shot quick and decisive. That's playing with pace. There is a speed factor to it for sure, where you're increasing kind of the number of possessions that you have on a nightly basis. But I think melding that with how they want to play on defense, having the energy on both ends of the floor and maintaining that energy throughout a whole game is going to be probably one of the first challenges he's going to face in coming days here. Jared Vanderbilt, I think, had had a good quote where he said, we're not out of shape, but it's just we got to get used to this new pace. And I think that was a good way of putting it, is that it's just a different speed that you have to adjust to. So I think we're going to see that adjustment try to play itself out here over the next few weeks. I think it's good that they'll have the All-Star break to everybody can kind of catch their breath, regroup, rest for a little bit before the second half of the season comes around, because the second half of the season is going to be fast and furious in terms of how it's scheduled. So
here's my question, and this is where I'm going to get into some of my own kind of personal philosophies of how this team is constructed and what they're trying to accomplish. Why do they want to play so fast? Maybe we can start there, because I don't get it. Like I
was just wondering the same thing myself, and I actually was wondering that as I was writing this article, and I think I'm going to ask that of Chris Finch over the coming days. What is the benefit to playing so fast? I'm not 100% certain on that. The only thing I could think of is that you force the defense into making decisions and making mistakes potentially. That's to me would be the main reason. You get in the half court, the defense, and if you're playing slow, the defense has time to defend everything, and you're not making them work for 24 seconds out of the shot clock. You're only making them work for 10 maybe. That would be probably the answer, but I'd like to hear his opinions on it as well.
Yeah, and here's the thing: like and I like how you explained it earlier, because there is a difference between taking shots early, like just putting up a shot with 17 seconds left on the shot clock, and it's not a great shot. You don't want that. You want to make quick decisions. You don't necessarily always have to have quick shots, but just in terms of raw pace, they were already pretty fast this year under Ryan Saunders, and they were really fast last year under Ryan Saunders. They were fourth in pace last season. I'm looking at the Hollinger stats right now, when they went 19-45. Year they led the league in pace, 2010, 2011. I believe that was Kurt Rambis's last year. I think they won 17 games that season. So playing fast hasn't always necessarily led to wins with this franchise, and they have tried this before to a certain degree. And the year that they made the playoffs with Tom Thibodeau, they didn't play fast. They were like 22nd in pace. They were fourth in efficiency in terms of points, points per 100 possessions, things like that. They didn't necessarily play fast. So they're gonna have to do some things to impress me or impress upon me the value of playing fast, because to me it exposes your defensive deficiencies, and that it gives your opponent more possessions too. And if you can't stop them, what's the point of extending a game in that manner?
Yeah, you're right. One way, if you are a, theoretically speaking, if you're an undermanned team in terms of personnel, one way to potentially win games is to shorten the game. You see that in the NFL with teams with running games. I used to cover a college team, Notre Dame, that used to employ the quote unquote burn offense, which was to shorten possessions. So I do wonder that from an analytical standpoint, if your personnel doesn't match up with the other team, why are you trying to create more possessions in a game instead of trying to shorten it? You're right. And I think Carl had some good thoughts last night too, when he said some of the shots that the Wolves were taking last night against Chicago were quote unquote fast break starters.
Yeah, I like that quote. That was a good one.
Kind of long rebound, and here they go out in transition, and all of a sudden, a quick miss at one end turns into an easy bucket at the other end, and that's the crux of what you're trying to fix here. And so, shot selection is the big thing. If you're taking a three, is it an in rhythm three? Is it an open three? If you're taking a mid-range shot, is it a smart mid-range shot and not just something that's forced, or that's maybe a shot clock beater potentially? So I think a lot of it goes back to shot selection, even when you do play at the pace that they do. Because like you said, they have played fast under Ryan Saunders. It's not like they've been a slow team.
Right.
But I think it's just a different kind of pace, and it has increased a little bit.
And the bigger thing, and a couple of things we want to get to, and we'll get out of here. The bigger thing, obviously, still is if they want to play this way, they still need more shooters, right? They've made an attempt to a certain degree. The Malik Beasley signing, certainly, chief among them. The D'Angelo Russell trade, he's a good 3-point shooter when he comes back healthy.
You even see that with the Juancho Hernan Gomez signing. He's us more of that stretch four who can make you pay from the outside. And obviously Towns shoots the three well too, but they haven't invested quite as much in the types of shooters that can make this kind of offense look even better. So I'd imagine that's kind of priority. The top priority for Rosa still is that he hasn't been able to he hasn't been able to, or he just hasn't yet made over this roster to the degree where this type of play that he wants to play will really work, right?
Yeah, I think you've seen, like you said, some moves in that direction, but yes, I think overall we haven't seen it, and I wonder where it comes from and where that's going to come. I have a feeling it'll come more in the trade market than it will in the free agent market. So I wonder, we'll see what kind of moves he has up his sleeve potentially at the trade deadline this year, and then in the off season. But you're right. I don't think you can have enough shooting, especially when you are trying to build this offense around Carl, who isn't afraid to go into the post, is going to draw attention in the post, and that could create open shots. He had 11 assists against Milwaukee this game. That was a career high for him. I think that was very notable that he had 11 assists in the first game of the Chris Finch era. If he's facilitating and hitting open guys and they're hitting shots, like that's an effective formula going forward. So you're right. Instead of having some of these guys who struggle shooting, which we saw a lot last year, you have more shooting on this team this year than you did last year. That's for sure, at least beginning of the year. But I still think that there's work to be done if you're going to try to build an ideal roster around Carl.
Sounds good. Chris Hine, go get some rest. It was a long week. You actually have a couple days off here without games, so yes. Enjoy it, and we'll talk to you again soon. When I'm sure you will likely be our first 4-time guest next time you're on the show.
I better be.
Great conversation with Chris Hine. As always, we will see how the Wolves want to play, especially in these next 12 games without Malik Beasley. It's going to be much more of a challenge now to play. They want to play the way they want to play, I would think, if they really want to space the floor, shoot these threes, and play fast. He was very well suited for that. So implementing a new system on the fly without one of your best players to implement that only makes Finch's job more difficult. Let's do a little history lesson right now. Jeff Day wrote about this, StarTribune.com Friday. 40-year anniversary today of the big brawl between the North Stars and Bruins, February 26, 1981. North Stars were on a 34-game winless streak at Boston Garden when they started piling up the penalties, fights almost immediately. 81 penalties in the game, 80 of them in the first period, 406 penalty minutes. North Stars end up losing 5-1, but they were proud of themselves. Glenn Sonmore said after the game, "You're right, I'm proud. We made a stand." Sonmore almost got into a fight with the Bruins head coach, Jerry Cheevers. And it's just one of those things where I don't glorify violence, but when you think back on these days of hockey and 400 penalty minutes, basically all in the first period, fighting from the outset, it almost makes you grin a little bit just because of the history of it all and thinking about how hockey was back in the day. So read more about that in today's StarTribune.com on Friday. A really interesting and fun kind of look back at that moment in history. And let's end today with the cooler. Velle E. Neal III, now Star Tribune columnist. You know him as a baseball writer for the last 2 decades in Minnesota. His role has transitioned his debut column Sunday in the Star Tribune and on StarTribune.com. Please read that. I'm really looking forward to where he takes this new role as columnist and the direction he goes with that, because he's a terrific person, talented writer, and a very good reporter. So I want to see what he's able to do with this new role, and I hope you guys will check that out as well. Thanks for listening all week. We'll be back Monday with a really good show Monday. Planning to talk to Jason Gerwin from The Streamable for an update on where we're at with streaming services like YouTube TV, Hulu, and the continuing stare down with regional sports networks like Fox Sports North. So you won't want to miss that one Monday. Lots of other good stuff next week as well. Thank you for listening all week to the Daily Delivery Podcast.